Okay, so I think we'll get started. There's plenty of people here. Thank you all for making it. We really appreciate everyone for showing up. Um, you know, this there was a lot of resources that went into this workshop, and having some external guests even come to make it. So thank you all for making the effort to be here. We totally appreciate it. I recognize most of you, but for some of you that I haven't introduced myself before, my name's Nick. Here with my coworker Tiffany. We manage the farm to table program here, so maybe you've taken a class with us or you're part of our community gardens. If not, we'll definitely send a follow up and let you all know about some of the other program offerings that we have available. But today we are joined by Sharon and Mark, um, and they are here to talk to us about apple tree grafting. One quick note: Mark is going to be recording from the back here. It should not focus on anyone's head or faces, maybe the back of your head, but he's here to record Sharon from the podium. When we do a close-up demonstration, he's not going to be recording because it's too hard. But just to, if everybody's okay with that, if not, just tell me. We're good. No one's okay. It's okay. All right. Thank you. Great. With that out of the way, Tiffany and I took a grafting workshop with Sharon over at UC Santa Cruz last year, and it was awesome. And the presentation she's about to give is probably very similar to the one that she gave to us. Really insightful, and we got to go home with a grafted apple tree. I happened to bring mine from last year. It's still alive, even though it looks like a stick. It's just dormant, trust me. So her methods do work. And we could take a closer look at that once we're a little done here. But Tiffany and I have been talking how we would really love to bring this experience to you all and to Googlers. This is probably a step up from the workshops we normally offer. This is a lot more involved, and you all get to go home with a grafted apple on a rootstock. Sharon will explain what all that means. So I'm going to get out of the way. Sharon, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you for coming. Mark, thank you for coming.
Can I just say
yes,
one more?
please. Sorry, I get ahead of myself.
Yeah, no worries. Did everyone sign the waiver? Did anyone not sign it?
I'll bring one over to you.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna be working with really sharp knives, and I'm sure Sharon's gonna get into it too. But just a reminder.
Thank you. I'll bring that over. You're all set here. You just push forward on the.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Sharon Zo, and that's my partner, Mark Moscow. And we are going to be talking about an introduction to grafting, specifically grafting deciduous trees. And this is also called dormant grafting because we're using, so most apple and pear trees have not come out of dormancy yet. A few varieties have. So the dormant part specifically refers to scions, which is the plant that we're trying to clone. The scions were collected earlier while they were falling dormancy, and they've been stored in the refrigerator. So grafting using dormant scions. So that's what specifically we're going to be talking about. And this technique applies to apples, pears. You could use that on plums, and a little later in the season, other stone fruit. And once you get better at the technique, you could even use it on evergreens such as citrus or avocado. But apples and pears are the easiest and most forgiving plants for us to get started on. So, any questions? All right. So, what I'm going to do is rather than having me talk about this is not yours, right? Oh, okay. Rather than having me talk about this and this and this, and you're wondering what the hell is she talking about, I'm just going to do a very quick demo of what I'm going to teach you. That way you have some framework as I talk about what a scion is and how a scion needs to be in order to be a successful graft and all that. Okay. So what grafting is, okay, we'll go a little further into the Okay, so I'm going to give you some handouts in the form of in email. So I'm going to tell you about how to acquire supplies, where to get scions and rootstock, and as well as the slides and aftercare instructions. Uh, so I'm going to do the first conceptual graft, and then yeah, we'll do that. So first of all, what is a rootstock? A rootstock is a plant. Usually it's about this tall. It has roots on it. And that's going to be the base that your cloned plant is going to be growing on. So that's called a rootstock. And I am using a simulated rootstock because rootstocks are valuable. Yes, Nick is going to show you. Where did I put the things I gathered?
Here. So this is what,
Okay.
do you want this up there?
Sure. So there are 20 of these plants here, and they are a hard resource to acquire sometimes. And then today, I also gathered 11 different kinds of unusual apples, and that's going to go on the top. And that's going to grow into the tree. So they're essentially clones. And so I'll start a demo. So here's a pretend rootstock. Rootstocks are usually a little bigger than your scions. This is like a gnarly piece of wood. And you could also use the same technique on your fruit trees at home to add a variety. And safety is really important. So first, this what I'm teaching is called a cleft graft. A cleft graft consists of a cleft that's cut into the rootstock. So here I cut the rootstock. We'll do much more detailed demonstration and explanation in a little while, but this is just something to give you a conceptual framework. So this is the scion. That's like the Cox's orange pippin or whatever rare apple that you want. So I cut the scion to like a flathead screwdriver shape. And I'm going to poke this. This kind of holds the rootstock open for a moment. And then I'm going to take some tape. There are many different kinds of grafting tapes. But what I'm doing is showing you what you could do with the bare minimum. Therefore, I'm using masking tape, which is not a bad tape for grafting purpose, except this roll of masking tape is splitting. It's shredding on me. So I'm going to use a different roll. Everything is doing that to me today. Thank you. So I'm going. This is called a graft union. Okay. So we need to apply pressure to the graft union and also seal it to protect it from dehydration. So here's the rootstock. Pretend that it has roots coming out of it. This is the scion. And then I'm going to take a piece of So there are two kinds of grafting tapes. One is something that has a lot of strength to secure your graft union. And the next thing, this is a much more delicate tape. It's to protect your scion from dehydration. Okay. So starting at the union. Okay, so now the next thing, which is very important, is to label. And I usually put more than one label on it. So this is a test graft. Like this. Any questions at this point? Yes.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So I was curious, when would you opt to graft versus like grow from scratch? Like at what cases when?
We will talk about that. If you don't get your answer in about an hour, ask me again. Okay. So here's the graft, and we will now go into our presentation. Back up.
I passed around another one.
I'm sorry, I can't hear very well, so you have to speak louder.
We're passing around an example.
Yes, yes, yes.
Just a bunch of these. I have it. Yep, I have another one.
We have 5 more.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, start from that end.
I think one thing to notice as you're looking at these, look at where the graft goes into the wedge part, and you'll see you should not be able to see any light drop through there. Really wound tight.
Okay.
Great on there.
And also notice it's touching at the edge rather than in the middle. That's really that's the most important thing.
Yes, definitely. There's a good reason as to why that is too.
Okay, so there's a quick conceptual graph. We did that. What is grafting? Grafting is a technique where you join 2 plant parts. So like you join a root system to a top of the plant and to have them grow as one. It's easy to put them together, but it's a lot harder to actually get them to adapt to each other, like an organ transplant. So they'll start growing. This photo that you're looking at, so first of all, about 98% of your fruit trees are grafted. And many of your ornamental plants are also grafted because the industry generally select a good rootstock, like for its properties, like its strength, its adaptability to soil conditions and disease resistance. And then they grow a top that has the delicious fruit or has the gorgeous, foliage and all of that. So this is a 1-year-old apple tree. I bought this last year. So this part is the rootstock. And this is the graft. They use a thing called a cleft graft, which allows them to use as little of the scion as possible. So the tree used to grow, the rootstock would have grown into a tree like that. So they grafted a bud onto the side, and this started growing. And once this started growing even just a few inches, they cut the top of the rootstock off. Okay, so you see this if you go home and look at your fruit tree, you'll see this. So that goes on growing. This is a thing that this particular rootstock tends to have a lot of trouble with. This is called a burnout. It doesn't affect the health of the plant. It's just not so pleasant to look at.
Are the rootstocks usually grown from seed then? Are the rootstocks grown from seed? Or?
Oftentimes they're cloned as well to get the specific property that you're looking for. So I also want to share, I have a neurological condition which makes, over time, has made my speech just a little slurred. So sometimes I might sound like somebody who's a little drunk. I'm not. It's just the condition that's making it a little more challenging for me. Okay, so grafting sometimes occur in nature when two plants have their parts pressed together. Sometimes they'll just start growing together and fusing into one. This is a practice that's been going on for thousands of years, and it usually involves two parts, the rootstock and the scion. How many of you have seen this book?
It's a fruit tree for every garden.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book for fruit trees, all things about fruit tree, except he doesn't talk about grafting. So this is a graft that they did last year. So this is only 1 year old. The bottom part, from this part down is the rootstock. This is the scion, and then this is the new growth that happened in last year. So remember, we cut a cleft into the rootstock. So, and then we stuck a wedge in there. So everything have grown, and therefore, so the rootstock has gotten further spread apart. So you can see this is a good example because there's a color difference. So the rootstock here has green bark, and the scion here has brown, tan colored bark, and the new growth tends to be a little bit more red. You see how tight this graft union has gotten? And in the next few years, it's possible that you won't be able to tell it's there at all. So how do you select scions and how do you select rootstock? Scions, it's a variety you want. And for fruit growers, it's the kind of fruit that you want. So for example, apples, Cox's orange pippin is very popular, kind of a gourmet apple. I also have lots of interesting things. So basically, you want to grab something that you can't buy in the market. Okay, it's appropriate for the climate. So some fruit variety requires a lot of cold hours before they'll break dormancy. We're kind of in the middle here. And if you live in Southern California, you need to find like really low chill apple varieties. Otherwise, they'll never leaf out or fruit for you. Some variety are more productive than others. And precocity, which means how long to produce fruit. It's how young would it start producing fruit. Some varieties are really good that way. Other really good apples takes much longer. So for rootstock, first of all, you want it to be compatible with your scion. So you want to use apple rootstock for your apple scion. And some stone fruit, you could mix species. And I'm going to give you a compatibility chart. Appropriate degree of dwarfing. So some rootstock will make you have a smaller tree that's more manageable tree because an apple tree, if you just let it do what it does, could get to be 30 feet tall. And these days, both home growers and even starting the industry, they're aiming for like 7-foot tall trees where all the work could be done from the ground. So no need to get on ladders. So dwarfing is important. So adaptability to the environment. This is the most important thing for your rootstock. Like if you have really damp clay soil, you want to get a rootstock that's good for drainage, cold hardy, drought tolerant, and disease resistance. And oftentimes you have to settle for what's available. Okay, how to handle scion and rootstock? Yeah.
I've heard that rootstock can affect the flavor of the fruit also. Is that true or is that not?
Not so much. With some citrus, like They use an easier, like a rougher rootstock for lemon, and you don't want to graft the sweet mandarin orange onto it because it doesn't sweeten the fruit as well. But mostly rootstock has almost no impact on the fruit. So how do you handle scions? Scions, it needs to be 1-year-old wood. So now it's 2024. So you want a wood that grew in 2023. You want it to be about the size of a pencil or a little thinner. It needs to have mature buds, but not old buds. And you'll see in a little while when I put out the scions, they're cut into sections and then stored in a Ziploc bag with some water in the fridge. It could last for several months. So here's a rootstock. Rootstock, when it's dormant, can be stored in sawdust. So like our bundle of rootstock, it gets shipped in damp sawdust. You want to get this into the soil before root starts growing, which is usually about a month before the leafing out. Trim the roots to encourage branching. We'll talk a little more about that later. So keys to success. Compatibility, we talked about that. That's really, really important. And cambium contact. Cambium is the part of the stem. Okay, here's the compatibility chart. You could look at that later. Cambium and cambio contact. So this is a cross section of a little stem, something about this size, or maybe a few years older. The green is the living tissue, which composes two parts. The phloem is the thing that conducts all the nutrients the tree makes down throughout the plant to the root. The xylem is what transports water and mineral nutrients from soil up to the tree. So this is really crucial for your success. You need to have the vascular connection. And the cambium is the layer that's between the xylem and the phloem. And it's also similar to human stem tissue. It can divide cells and differentiate cells so it can regrow the vascular connection for you. So cambium, you're going to hear this repeatedly in grafting because it is the source of growth and vitality for the tree you're making or for any tree. Here's another picture. This is a photo. This is definitely a 1-year-old tree. So this green portion there, you see these darker dots? Those are vascular bundles. So that's all the conductive tissue. And the cambium is anywhere from 1 cell to just a few cells thick. So it's so thin that you can't see it. But you kind of have to infer where it is. So it's kind of like in the middle of this dotted line. So that's what you want to make contact. So if you have a big stick and you have a little stick, so oftentimes your rootstock is thicker than your scion. So your rootstock is going to have thicker bark than your scion. So here, this is how examples of how we match the cambium. Is your scion needs to come in a little bit to get the cambium to match rather than matching the outer bark. This is just kind of a blow-up version. And this is if you're looking at a cross section like this. This is the scion, and that's your rootstock. I think the next, let's see. So pressure is number 3. When you put these parts together, you want to press them together really, really tight so they will bond. And then the step after pressure is preventing dehydration. So pressure, you wrap it with a kind of graphene tape that you could really put a lot of tension into it, like I did with the masking tape on that example. So you use tension, and you want to overlap the tape a little bit. So you can use freezer tape, contractor grade masking tape, or a white PVC tape. Dehydration prevention is that translucent stuff I put on top. That is called buddy tape. It's a new age material just designed just for grafting. So on dormant grafting, you don't actually need that. So like grafting right now, if you could just protect the very cut tip from dehydration, you'll be okay. But I always like to put it there because we might have just some really warm spring days. And so the healing of a cambium is like a competition between dehydration and healing. So you want the healing to really get going before the parts get dehydrated. So special tape. And so the thing I used, a growing bud can break through that. Otherwise, you'll have to unwrap the tape once the scion starts growing really well. The next thing that's important is polarity. So you want to have the root end of your scion pointing in the same direction as the root end of your rootstock. You don't want to turn it upside down because that's not going to grow. Label. We said a little about label. Labeling is always important. So I usually mark what the scion is and what the rootstock is. And then I tend to double label because labels fall off, they fade in the sun, and a tree that you don't know what it is not going to be very useful for you. Okay, when do you graft? So the easiest time for a beginner to graft is before leaving out. So you use dormant scions. Ideally, you use a rootstock that's also dormant because everything is just easier to handle. Weather is cool. It's just a lot more forgiving. Also, by different species, apples and pears and plums, you could do that right now. You could do that later in the season. I've grafted apples all the way from January to November successfully. Other stone fruit, they're more likely to succeed when the weather is warmer. Like after leaving out in early spring, some things, cherries, tend to graft best in the summer, like in June. And starting in June, you could also use what's called greenwood scions, which is the scions that started growing about now, and they finally get mature buds. You could cut that off the tree. So what is a cleft graft? Cleft graft is the one I just demonstrated. So why do we want to use a cleft graft? Number one, it's a simple concept. Number two, the rootstock, this cleft, tends to want to come back together. Okay, so you'll have a lot of contact, and it's also supporting the weight of your scion as scion gets bigger. So everybody will get bigger together. Also, this is a kind of graft where I could teach a beginner how to use a grafting knife safely. And I teach you, once you learn how to use a grafting knife to to like make a really straight cut. Then you can use that same skill and apply it to a lot of different kinds of graft. So a wedge into a cleft. Okay, remember I talked about crossing the cambium? So this is how I make cambium cross, because the scion is smaller and the rootstock is bigger. I'm only guessing where's the cambium. Remember, it's so small we can't see it. So rather than guessing and having them parallel, where they'll miss each other altogether, I tilt one of the pieces to make the lines cross. All it takes is one point of contact. And once it makes connection there, it'll start growing and it'll start callousing, and then the whole union will heal. So you see how this scion angles into the cleft a little bit more here on the bottom, and it's right at the surface up on top. So somewhere about here, it's making the contact inside. Okay, grafting knives. So what makes a grafting knife different is that it is a single bevel knife. What that means is this side of the knife is completely straight. Okay, they didn't grind it on that side. Whereas on the other side, this is the knife surface and it's ground at an angle to achieve a blade. So a single bevel knife allows you to make a straight cut. Whereas the double bevel knife, you're more likely to get just like scoops out of the wood. And the reason why I keep emphasizing straight cut is you'll see in a moment. So it must be very straight in order for you to get a cut. Here, this might be your knife. So here's a demonstration of how sharp a grafting knife needs to be in order for you to make good cuts. This is not 100% sharp, so it's catching a bit. But you get the idea. Okay, here's a picture. This is more like for your reference. We'll be talking about all of this, but a reminder for you at home if you want to try to do this. Making the cut, you want the cut surface to be really, really flat. Like this has no wiggle in it, neither do that. So here's a photo that shows what a straight cut should look like. This is the cut surface. The person who took this photo taped it to a tabletop to show how straight it is. So from here to here, you see no light coming through. Okay, so this is an example of some tight fit. You see no light coming through, except at the very bottom there. That's okay at that point. So this cut is, you see how wavy this is? Okay, so it's not gonna make a very good cambial contact with the rootstock. And this is an example of, it's hard to make a rootstock cut very wavy, but it's really easy to make a scion very wavy. So you see how the green part is not in contact. No matter how tight you apply the pressure, it's not going to come into contact. Okay, so a few advanced techniques. So a few slides back, this is mostly flat to flat. It's actually pushed in a little bit. So remember we talked about the crossing, not so much parallel, but having the crossing. So what do you think of this contact? It looks a little funky, doesn't it? This is actually a more advanced technique because here with this bud, the cambium on the bud actually goes like that and goes like that and goes back in. So this graft union is going to allow us this point of contact, that point of contact, and then two more points on the other side that we can't see. Okay. Yeah.
Well, just kind of looking at, with like also there maybe cambium contact on the left side of the rootstock too. So
Maybe not, because we usually cut. So this side is thicker, the other side being thinner, because that's not going to be the point of contact. So it may not be in contact, but if it's close enough that it is in contact, we will have another point of contact.
Directionally, do you try to angle it so that the tree, the bud that you're targeting for growth grows the opposite direction of the lean, or do you consider that?
That is ideal. Oftentimes, the buds do what they want to do. Okay, so like this bud, I usually don't plan for it to grow. I leave two buds above the union, but sometimes neither of those buds are very strong, but this one ends up being really strong. So what you want to do is once it starts growing, you want to train it. Okay, you want to direct it to go upward. So this is an example of having lots of contact. So again, the cambium of the bud probably goes something like that. Okay, so we have 4 points of contact, 1, 2, 3, and then the other is kind of behind that bud. It kind of looks funky, doesn't it? Okay, now we will do a detailed graft demonstration. Just a few things that I'm going to be in resources I'm sharing with you is where you could obtain scions and rootstock source. So these 5 nurseries have either one or the other or both. And then every year at CRFG, which stands for California Rare Fruit Growers, it's a membership organization that's really promoting growing like backyard culture, preservation of heirloom variety, and things that taste good and have higher nutrient density than what you typically buy in grocery stores. So every year in January or February, Monterey Bay chapter that's in Santa Cruz has an annual Scion exchange, and Santa Clara Valley chapter also has a exchange. That will be in your resource handout. Aftercare. I'm just gonna go through this right now because after I do the detailed demo, we'll just let you guys break out and do practice, and we'll come around and help you. So after care of your graft, you are going to receive a plant that's bare root. So the root is not in soil. Similar to the way you buy a fruit tree from the nursery in January or February. So you want to immediately plant it into a 5-gallon pot because 5 gallons is the amount of soil that's needed to grow a healthy plant for up to a year. And so you'll be able to either pot up your plant or have it packed into a plastic bag with some moist sawdust. So if it's not in a pot, plant it as soon as you get home. And also, as soon as you get home, you want to thoroughly water until water just really comes out the bottom. What that's for is it compresses the soil down a little bit so you'll have full root to soil contact. Otherwise, you have lots of air gaps in there, and that causes roots to die. So 50% shade at first, and you want to keep it moist but not wet once it starts to leaf out and really start growing. And you don't want the rootstock to overtake the scion. What that means is if the rootstock is kicking out its own growth, you want to just pinch them back. You want to let them grow a little bit but not too much. The reason being, those leaves are actually photosynthesizing and making nutrients. You want that to go back and feed the root and feed the new part that's growing. Also, I'm gonna have you leave 2 buds. You actually want to choose one. So let it grow a few inches. And then you choose one that's growing the strongest. And then you suppress the other one. And by summer, you should just have only one single growth. And also by summer, if your scion is growing well, you could remove all the rootstock suckers. So, and you could remove the tape after 6 to 12 inches of growth. You don't need to unwind the tape. You could just take your knife and gently cut the masking tape on the sides, and it'll naturally fall off.
Sorry, question.
Yeah.
Before you move on, you said suppress one of the buds. What technique is that?
It's like you pinch the top off. It gets to be this tall, you cut it to half. If it's just a couple of leaves, you just remove the tip. We don't want them to be boss. There can only be one boss
So you're not cutting it off at the side.
until about summertime. Then you could remove everything. Okay. We already did this. So this is far more detailed than you need to know right now, but do remember that it's here. So you want it to grow like into a single whip, straight up. So you don't want it to branch yet the first year. And then when you plant this tree next year, then you could prune it to about 30 inches to get it to start branching. Okay, so once again, compatibility, good tool, crossing the cambium, applying pressure, preventing desiccation and aftercare. And the one that I forgot to use is prevent spread of diseases. So these plant parts can all spread disease. So you want to choose, so if you're taking scion from a friend's tree, you want to make sure that the tree is in good health, that there aren't lesions on the branch, and you cut that off, and that's going to transfer to your new branch. And also there is a disease called fire blight. And if the tree has active, it turns a certain branch totally black. If you see that on a tree, you don't want to be taking scions at that stage. You could take it later in the summer. Okay, so that's the presentation. I'm just going to, okay, we'll leave that there. Okay, I'm going to do a detailed demo, and I will explain to you what I'm doing every step of the way. Any questions at this point?
How concerned are you with sanitizing tools when you're doing grafting?
So, very good question. So, we're practicing right now. And after we on practice wood, after we finish practicing, I want everybody to clean the tool before you graft your tree. That's really important. So, a few things about sanitizing is that any sanitizer is not going to penetrate through debris and sap and gunk and all that. So the first thing is to actually clean your tool so the surface is clean. So then, whatever sanitizer disinfectant can actually clean the surface instead of just trying to sanitize sap or gunk, which it doesn't do very well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So Lysol wipe is one possibility. You also want to kind of keep it wet for a little while. So you wipe it and just let it dry. Give it at least a minute to dry before you wipe it off with a paper towel. So if I could squeeze in a little bit here. Okay, that's good. Still missing a knife. You're welcome to come stand behind me also. In which case, yeah, if I sit down, then people could be standing over me and you'll be able to see really well.